Serenbe is a place where people live, work, learn, and play in celebration of life's beauty. And we're here to share the stories that connect residents and guests to each other and to nature. This is Serenbe Stories.
Tom Reed is more of a startup guy than a politician. In fact, he's been on the Inc. 500 5,000 list over 3 times for different startups. But moving to Serenbe offered a unique opportunity to lead a startup city, Chattahoochee Hills, as their mayor. He talks about how to thrive financially while mindfully preserving a city's culture and discusses how the city provides an amazing quality of life to the forward-thinking zoning of Chattahoochee Hills. We round out the episode sharing how he works with other Southside mayors to revitalize and preserve rural land on the edge of Atlanta.
But first, Serenbe Stories is brought to you by the Inn at Serenbe. The Inn is nestled in the rolling countryside of bucolic Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. You can relax by the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on the wraparound porch. Play on the croquet lawn, swings, and in-ground trampolines. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in luxurious rooms on the Inn grounds or within the community of Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com. All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody back to Serenbe Stories today. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hello, Monica.
We have a very special guest today. We have Tom Reed here. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Monica.
Welcome, Tom.
Tom Reed is our current mayor of the city of Chattahoochee Hills, which Serenbe sits within. He is also a very long-time resident, in fact, one of the early residents, which we're going to hear about, as well as a serial entrepreneur. He has been on the Inc. 500 5,000 list multiple times for multiple ventures, including what you may know him or his product well is in anthropology. If you pop on in and see the candles Capri Blue, those are all Tom's. So Tom, we want to welcome you here and want to say welcome to Serenbe Stories.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for having me.
So one of the first things that we always ask all of our guests is, how did you find out about Serenbe?
100% through my wife. It's interesting, actually. I was right in the middle of starting up the company that is the Capri Blue Candle Company, and was very deep in that. And we had had a company up in Indiana that we had sold, and, I had been casting around for new things to do and started the candle business up there, actually. And we found this little company in Mississippi that was going through bankruptcy. And I bought the company to get some of the assets that they had. And in going down there to try to shut it down and bring the things back up to Indiana where we lived, realized that there was a better workforce down there for what we were doing than what we had. And it was just a better place to be for the business that we had, and ended up moving the business, all of the business, down to Mississippi. And we were living in South Bend, Indiana at the time, and that's a heck of a commute.
Yes.
And we had family here in Atlanta, and we decided to move back to Atlanta. It took a couple of years to do that, but we were back here in Atlanta. And, living up in Roswell, which is where I'd gone to high school. Very different Roswell than when I went to high school. And, loved it for the first couple of minutes. We'd been living in rural Indiana, and being around all the amenities was just a really exciting thing. And then the traffic just drove us nuts.
Interesting.
And we had some issues too. Our kids had been, free ranging in Indiana, a big cornfield behind the house and all of that. And we got fined by the HOA at the little subdivision we were living in because our kids had built a tree fort in the shrubs behind the pool.
No.
Yeah. And we just realized that it wasn't good for our kids, and the traffic was driving us nuts, and we started looking for someplace else to go. And, if you're living on the north side in Atlanta, you look north.
Right.
And for us, we were ending up in Dahlonega, looking at places. And we were actually at a Hedgewood development called Vickery up there, looking at some houses because they had really cute houses. And one of the builders' representatives up there said, we were talking to her, and Karen, I guess knew her actually. It was somebody that Karen had known from grade school even. Anyway, she was saying, we just went on this bus tour last week to this crazy place down on the south side. We got on the bus and we drove past the airport and drove and drove and drove. And it was amazing. And it sounds like exactly what you guys are looking for. Now, I'm in the middle of starting up a business, kind of humoring my wife, right? My wife's wanting to move again. I didn't have any time to think about it. But we, at one point, March of that year, 2006, I think it was, maybe 2005, I don't remember, got in the minivan, piled the kids in. We're going to go look at this place. And to me, it was just a field trip on a Saturday. You know, kids were complaining because they knew mom wanted to move. And like, we just moved. We don't want to move again. Mm-hmm. And we came down here and piled out of the minivan. And it was the weekend that the Daisy opened.
Okay,
and so
05. Right?
05.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So we got out and walked on the trails, and, you know, Annabelle fell in the little waterfall down here, slid down and fell in it. And somebody who was at the Daisy with their kids lent her some dry pants. And, you know, the kids had this day that was like a day that they used to have up in Indiana.
Yeah.
And by the end of the day, the whole family had decided we had to be here.
Okay.
And, you know, this is, I'll admit this on air because the statute of limitations is probably out on this, but, you know, I'm in the middle of starting up a business. There was absolutely no way we could afford to move here.
Okay.
Hadn't had an income for a couple of years, you know, it was that phase in my life. But that was back in the declared income days for loans. And, you know, we kind of made it work. I knew I could cash flow it. So, and we put a reservation in on a lot. I met with the builders a couple of times. We realized we weren't going to be able to get here in time for school, and bought the one house that was being built that could be ready in time for school.
Oh, okay.
And moved in. And that was the first house we had here. And, yeah, that was it, you know, and like the kids were just so thrilled to be here in a place again where they could be outside.
Yeah.
And that was the initial draw. And it was 100% Karen's, you know, research and finding the place and frankly dragging us all down here because nobody wanted to come look. And it just struck a chord with the entire family. It was amazing.
That's great.
And little did you realize how that was going
Oh my gosh, yeah.
affect your entire life.
Transformative in so many ways, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that road was still a dirt road at the time. Right? When the Daisy had opened, right? Coming this way.
The road that we moved onto was dirt at the time.
Which is the first
got
phase
paved right
of
before
Serenbe.
we moved in. Yeah.
Which is super cool. Like, and that's a great leap of faith, you know, beyond your kids having a great time.
No, and we lived in construction for the first few years. I mean, it was the first house done on that side, you know. But it didn't matter. It is an amazing place. Was and is.
Tell us a little bit about, I mean, I know Steve's talked about it, but those early days and sort of the time around the Daisy. I think was Chef Nick around at that point? I don't remember. Yes. And
that was, well, it was...
it's like maybe less than 100 people here, right?
Sure, right. It was Angie and you know, those guys were here at that point. And, you know, cute little bake shop. And it was the only thing, right? The only place for anybody to go. And I don't know, there may be 30 or 40 people living here.
Yeah.
And everybody was everybody's best friend. And that was the most amazing thing, stepping into that community. And, you know, I mean, it changes. It's changed as it's gotten bigger. But in that moment, there are several things that I think about, like, you know, the fact that Max's best friend, because we're really the only people here that had kids.
Max.
My oldest, who was like 15 at the time, maybe 14, 15. His best friend for the first couple of years we lived here was John Graham.
Sure.
Who ran the Institute.
Yeah. And
who had been a sailor in the Navy. And they loved to sit in the Daisy and talk about airplanes and things like that. And I mean, how cool is that? You know, it's Steve talks about this a lot, this kind of going back to the kind of communities that humans evolved in, right? These small communities where everybody knew everybody and you were with all the generations in the same room. And, you know, I mean, in those days, there was a real feeling of that kind of community barn raising going on all the time.
Yes.
You know, I think about how we used scraps from all the houses that were being built and built that first tree house out there. And, you know, it wasn't just the people from Serenbe. There were some people from Serenbe at the time, like the Mosbys. And, you know, we were all out there building that treehouse. And, you know, Steve at some point had a couple of loads of boulders delivered out there. And we spent a whole weekend lining all the trails down there with the boulders. And I mean,
so cool.
Those pictures of that. And, you know, my kids at 10 and 12 and 15 or whatever they were at the time, you know, in the middle of that. And John Graham there directing traffic. And like, it was just the coolest thing. It was really special.
Yeah. I remember moving here and hearing about that or seeing the treehouse, and they're like, oh, that's the treehouse that the parents built or the community built. And just couldn't quite wrap my head around that. Like, what do you mean they all went out? You know, how did they decide to do that? But it was that was, and it's stuff like that still happens, but that was sort of an early example of sort of everybody coming together and seeing a need and just making it happen.
The interesting thing is the things still happen like that. But in those days, because there were 30 or 40 people here, we took roll call, if you will, sort of.
Everybody was there.
If everyone was there, you would say, "Where's so and so? Are they okay? I wonder where they are." And somebody would go call and see.
Get out here and
out of concern more than just you're there that we missed you. So we're enough people that isn't happening, and these things are happening in small pockets.
Well, and it's where a lot of the kind of community traditions started. When somebody is sick here or somebody dies or whatever, the entire community comes out. Pretty soon people are begging, like, I don't have more room in my refrigerator. Thank you. And those sorts of things, which again, if you live in a small rural community, those things don't seem unusual at all, right? Because that's how everybody used to live. But, where most of us are coming from in town or from the suburbs, that's just really unusual.
Right.
One of the things, actually, I think about one of the things that kind of was the last straw for us, right before we decided to move, in the suburbs, you drive home to the cul-de-sac, the garage door goes up, you drive in, garage door closes, and you don't see anybody. Maybe the kids are playing, maybe you say hi to the neighbor, but you don't talk to people. And we found out once that the neighbors across the street, they had a 16 or 17-year-old daughter who had died. And we found out 3 weeks after it happened. And I mean, how what kind of world is that? I mean, here, if somebody stubs their toe, the community comes running. And I mean, think about actual examples of that. Once when Mary Pridich cut her finger chopping and let out this scream, and Karen comes running down from our house everybody came running. And, the fireman that lives in town came and bandaged her up, and one of the doctors put a stitch in, and it's just amazing. Yeah. And again, it's not unusual. If you go back 50 years or 100 years, it's how a lot of us were raised, but it's really unusual now. Yeah. And I think it's really powerfully important for our children. I feel like it's really been impactful for my kids. So
to see that, definitely.
And to be in it, to be a part of it.
To be part of
they
it,
They feel ownership of this stuff too.
No, I totally agree.
And those kids who had formative years here, where are they now?
Max is living up in Smyrna, and he's about to get married this fall. My daughter Emmeline, the middle one, is living in Brooklyn, working for a startup in Manhattan. She's about to get married this fall as well. Annabelle is about to finish up at school at UGA. Everybody's doing well, and they're remarkably wonderful and well-adjusted adults that I love to hang out with. So, that part too. I think kids spending all of their time with other kids is overrated. I think adult socialization from a young age is super important. And, our kids were always precocious little adults running around with a bunch of little adults here. And, you think about the stories, when Chef Nick was down working at the Daisy, Emmeline didn't have enough to do. She would go down there and just help out. She was 13 years old. Right. And they loved each other. And she loved working in the kitchen. She loves to cook. And, at one point she said, it's not fair that I'm working here and I'm not getting paid. And Nick was like, I can't pay you. You're 13 years old. So she wrote a letter to the governor of Georgia, who wrote back and gave her permission to get paid. And she was getting paid at the Blue Eyed Daisy at 13, moved when Nick went up to the farmhouse, moved up there and was working there.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And that kind of thing just doesn't happen in other places, right? No. And you think about where your kids develop their entrepreneurial bent or their leadership skills or whatever. It's from doing things like that. It's being exposed to things like that. And so, it's been an amazing list of those sorts of things here for our kids.
Yeah, no, it's good because you do see a lot of the kids working in the different stores, or Camp Serenbe is a great example. That's sort of like a coveted spot to be a junior counselor, you know? And so I think it's good for the kids to see that. And then a lot of them can walk themselves or bike themselves there to their jobs or volunteer work over the summer or on weekends. So
and the fact that they get the free range here is super important. I mean, I talk about this a lot when I'm out trying to describe this place to other people. Those times where you go down to the general store to pick up some milk or whatever, and there's 30 kids running around on that quad out in front of there. And there's one or two dads reading their paper in the pavilion, kind of half paying attention. And nobody, it's fine. It's fine. Everybody knows it's fine. And everybody's looking out for each other. And hey, would your mom want you doing that? You hear that kind of stuff said. And, the kids kind of shrink back to what they should be doing. And it's again, it's the way things should be. And it just happens here naturally. And I'd argue, part of it is intentionality around, the things that we say. places like the Institute where we sit together and talk about what we want this place to be when it grows up. Just the conversations that we have about it. And part of it is the physical form.
Right.
You design a community where people have to be together. They have to bump into each other. You get more of that engagement just by the fact of the design. And the inspired thing here that is not the case in most new urbanist communities, and I've spent a lot of time researching this and going to them and going to CNU conferences and all of that, is the connectivity to nature here.
Yep.
Right? I mean, traditional neighborhood design is fantastic and it creates social connection and all of that. But here, you also have the ability to go out and be in nature, and everybody has that opportunity, and everybody here takes it. And that's another just amazing aspect that makes this that much better.
After moving here, you've really become a student of urban planning, I would say. And was there any interest in that before, or did that all spark from being here?
I had the fantasy in high school maybe of being an architect at one point, right? So I liked that kind of design kind of thing. And in my work career, oddly, because I had been planning on going off and being a lawyer, right? And then kind of took a turn and had a summer job that turned into a career. And I've worked around machinery and things like that. And I kind of like the whole mechanical, how things work thing, right? And when you do startups, or at least the way that I do it, a lot of the thing is a deep dive that you do in the beginning into the industry, right? How does this work? How do you maximize things? I've come to find that I'm not an inventor. I'm really not. I'm a maximizer, right? I'm really good at taking an idea and maximizing it. And so, we came here, and literally the first day, we moved in on like a Thursday and Friday. And Friday afternoon, Garney comes to me. Garney's maybe 18 or 19 at the time, and says, "Hey, we're doing a petition drive. We're trying to annex into Palmetto, and we need help getting signatures. You want to come?"
Oh, that's so great.
And I was like, yeah, sure. Sounds fun, and was out on Petersburg Road and, walking around the community outside of Serenbe. And, it was a very quick lesson. I'm sure I was saying things that weren't right? But a very quick lesson in the why of the design here. We knew that something had drawn us here, right? The appeal of this place. And I love maps, right? And looking at the drawings of what Serenbe was going to be was always so amazing to me, because it wasn't that when we moved here.
No.
Right? It was this muddy construction site, frankly. But you could see the bones of this amazing vision, right? And so my practice is to dive into things that I'm interested in. And it was, CNU, I think, happens every spring.
Which is the Congress for the New
Congress
Urbanism.
for New Urbanism, which is where people that do kind of traditional neighborhood design all live. And it's an amazing organization, too. It is a Congress in the true sense. It's not a convention where everybody's there selling each other. It's a place where people go and argue about how to make things better. It's one of these very transparent and obnoxious kind of groups. but you get better outcomes because nobody's satisfied with good enough, right? And anyway, so I started going to that and started making friends. And, I've got hundreds of books now on this subject matter, right? Trying to learn how and why it works and, just diving into it. And then, at the beginning, I'm out getting petition signatures and, a deep dive into the background of how the idea came to be and who was behind it. And, Steve spent a lot of time with me too, kind of walking me through the history and who the players were and all of that. And I just like that kind of stuff anyway.
And the petition was, just if you want to clarify, that petition wasn't for the city yet, but it was.
Well, for clarity, what had happened, our initial overlay in 2002 was in unincorporated Fulton County. And then there was an effort of cityhood, and there were some things that happened there. Initially, we were going for cityhood, and then there was some property that got annexed into Palmetto. And so we analyzed, why not just be one big city and go in with Palmetto? And so there was an effort to do that. And then there was a realization that we would double the population, and we would have an incredible voting force. And so some of the political leaders in Palmetto decided that wasn't a good idea.
Okay.
So that is the period of time that Tom arrived. And then the next step back was to go ahead we had already been approved by the state legislature to form our own city.
Okay.
And so then the step back was to move forward with that. And then, Tom, you became very involved in that effort then to establish our own city.
Yeah, it was interesting, right? Because there was this maelstrom going on of all of these politics, and, it was all happening very quickly, a lot of players, and as often happens in those cases, there were people taking sides and positions and whatever, and it had gotten kind of tense. And Palmetto not accepting the annexation, even after everybody here, in 2 weeks got all the signatures needed. I mean, nobody thought it was even possible, and we pulled it off, right? And I met all these amazing people in the context of that, because there was this group called the Chattahoochee Hill Country Alliance that was made up of the landowners in the area, small landowners, large landowners, everybody that was important in the community. And they had done this thing and it hadn't worked out, right? Like it didn't get done. And there was pushback then, that failed. And anytime something doesn't happen, people are trying to figure out who was at fault and all of that, right? And what came out of that was this new group that was not just the landowners, but the landowners and just everybody who lived here, called the Chattahoochee Hill Country Organizing Committee. I mean, because we love big, long acronyms here. And basically that group came together to do the research to see if the idea of cityhood was economically viable. Like, everybody knew that would be a good route for controlling the zoning, but could you actually make it work as a city? Because, you look around, there's no city here. And the end of that process, I joined that team, was on the finance committee, was the chair of the finance committee, ended up being the president of the organization. And we did all that research and then had a big meeting where 500 or 600 people from the community came to the Baptist Children's Home. And, we talked through all the stuff and show of hands, and, everybody raised their hand. We wanted to become a city.
Right.
And then we rolled forward with that process. And
because the legislature had already approved that, you didn't need a vote in unincorporated. You just needed sort of
we already had it approved from the state legislature.
We did have a vote here in the city then.
Yeah, we had. And we then had a Kasim Reed, who at that time was our state legislator.
Oh, interesting.
And I really wrote the charter, so the charter was sitting there.
I see.
But the state required then a local vote. You had to have 60% of your, I think it was
50% actually for cityhood. Yeah.
And so
we got 90, so it wasn't any.
And so this was the vote then coming forward.
Okay, great.
To become the city. So this was the key vote, which was the last step in cityhood.
And for people in Atlanta, this is at the same time when Sandy Springs was going. Is this correct?
This is right after Sandy Springs.
Right.
So Sandy Springs set the model.
And
Milton and
John Creek, I think, was another
Milton's,
one?
Johns Creek, and us were the same cycle.
Because I remember, I wasn't here at the time, but hearing this, controversy on the north side of was this good or bad for things. So talk a little bit about the economic feasibility of it and, why it's a benefit to go from an unincorporated swath of land, part of Fulton County, to being, with no cityhood to being a city. What are the benefits?
Well, I mean, so
for anyone,
the economic piece of this is that's a big conversation, and we were, I will say, overly optimistic at the time. We did a study with the Eggers group up at Georgia State, Robert Eggers, I think, and he's a scientist up there that does analysis on city finances and whatnot. And, they looked at the area, they looked at what was going on here, and they created a draft budget that showed that it would work, right? That was wildly optimistic, unfortunately.
Okay.
But we were using that budget, and that was the, that was the information that we had, the best data that we had when we went out to the community then and said, look, we can control our own zoning. We can take control of our destiny here. Fulton County hadn't been really protecting the zoning.
Okay.
And, we were afraid that annexation would eat up little pieces of it, bits at a time, and you'd be left with this zoning not being followed, right? This amazing zoning. And I could talk about it for days.
Okay.
And the other thing early on we suspected is Fulton County was headed to be a municipal county.
Right.
And today now that's happened.
That's
There
right.
is no more unincorporated.
Can you define
So
that
we
for
would
me?
have become a part of another city anyway. They got out of the municipal services business.
This land that we're on potentially we would have gotten annexed into, say, Union City.
Because what has happened is all of the unincorporated land has ended up becoming a city or annex. So the county could no longer have all this independent services such as planning and all for a small area this small of unincorporated. So eventually we would have been forced into annexation.
And so you had that awareness.
Right. And the fear was that when that happened, we would be a small part of a big entity without a lot of political pull, and they wouldn't protect the zoning. And so, that's why we became our own city, to control our own fate.
But then the economic benefits are really the social services also, right?
That's the biggest one. I mean, when you think about how that works, the tax money that we get all goes towards services here that we decide how to administrate. So we have our own little local police department. We have our own fire department. The people that work here know the people that live here.
Yep.
And when you're a small part of a huge county, I mean, you think about it, when we were unincorporated Fulton County, I hit a deer once. And after waiting for 2 hours for a police officer to come, finally the dispatcher told me, just go home and call him in the morning. And, I actually got in trouble the next morning for leaving the scene of an accident, and they had to replay the 911 tape to hear the dispatcher tell me this, because this was the reality here. You could not get service here.
Yes.
Because we were such a small, sparsely populated part of the county. And now we've got amazing service levels here. Because,
and these are all full-time paid
That's right.
employees. This isn't a volunteer fire department by any means.
How many people are on staff right now at the city?
We have about 60 people altogether. You have rotating shifts on fire and all of that. You've got people that aren't full time, but we have a full time service. 4 firefighters on, and they're all paramedics. It's not just that we have local service that is more responsive; it's also more qualified.
Okay.
We
Because
only
you
have
control
paramedics. We only, we have a much higher level of service. We've done things like, we're not licensed to have an ambulance, but we have a vehicle that looks just like an ambulance and is kitted out just like an ambulance, that goes to every accident just like an ambulance would. In the case where somebody would die without being transported right away, we can transport. And, that is a level of service that is just higher than could have ever happened before. The other thing, too, is Chattahoochee Hills. And again, we could go on for a long time about this conversation, but Chattahoochee Hills lays out a more optimistic vision of what development on the south side of Atlanta could look like. And Atlanta has a long, long history of racial division, right? It was the city that was too busy to hate, so there weren't riots and things like that here, but we definitely had white flight and all of those sorts of things. And there has been a history of disinvestment south of 20 because it's the other side of town.
Definitely.
You come into Chattahoochee Hills and you would never consider it being anything other than beautiful horse country, farm country, and all of that. But there's still this kind of mentality. And that mentality has hurt the cities between us and Atlanta, the Union cities and East Points and all of that. And the fact that we have a development in Chattahoochee Hills, in Fulton County, in South Fulton County, that's as high quality as Serenbe is, right? And the vision that we have for Chattahoochee Hills and the zoning that we have that, basically is going to preserve most of the land forever as forest and field and farm, and is going to have these amazing, walkable, high value communities scattered around to fund that preservation, is something that I think a lot of people down here would have never thought was possible, and we're proving that it is.
That's great.
And so it gives us a lot of weight as we talk about how to help the other cities around us do better and be better, because we can hold out for better down here, and we've got this economic driver of the airport 20 minutes away, and there's all this undeveloped land that is not spoiled. There's nothing down here that you have to apologize for, right? Nothing down here that needs to be redeveloped, and all of this opportunity. And we're helping set the standard for that in a way that serves everybody around us. So it's become this really good thing.
Right.
Now, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to just step you back and sort of talk about, so once you guys had, everybody, the 500-600 people voted yes, became a city.
Well, then we went out and did a campaign in the community, right?
Right.
And then the 2,500 people that are voters here voted. 90% of them voted for the city. We had the highest turnout and the highest percentage vote of any of the new cities.
That's incredible.
Right? It was an amazing campaign. Yeah, and then you have a couple months to get ready to be a city, right?
Okay.
And you know, it's daunting. One of the things people don't realize, and like I'm not sure that we really realize this either. You don't get your tax money till October. You become a city in January.
Uh-oh.
Right? Yes. No. So there's this thing called a tax anticipation note, and like you can get a loan.
So
that
you're like,
bridges.
we'll sit here for 9 months doing nothing.
It's hard. So like we spent a few months really scrambling to get city services set up. We made a deal, for example, with the Fulton County Sheriff's Department to provide police coverage until we could stand up our own police department. We did a lot of things like that. We were lucky to have a Fulton County firehouse already in the city, and as a part of cityhood, there's an arrangement by which that transfers for what is a nominal sum of money.
Okay.
Now, you know, it was the oldest truck they had. It was whatever, but we had a starting point. Right. And we had amazing volunteers that stepped up until we could afford to pay people. A lot of people did things for free.
Right.
Our first city manager, Bob Simpson, worked for the first couple of years for free.
Wow.
You know, just amazing people stepping up to do this stuff. And that team kind of came together to put all of this together. And as the president of the organizing committee, I was running that effort, right? And so, you know, we were working with companies like Chattahoochee Hills to provide services and, you know, got it all ready to go. And then, you know, you get to this point where it was like, so who's going to be the mayor? And who's going to be the
or city council? Is that a requirement to?
Yeah,
to
you have to have those.
Okay.
And we had the first elections that November.
Okay.
And, you know, I got drafted to run, you know, well, you need to be the mayor. And then, you know, of course, there are other people in the community saying, hey, he just moved here. He can't be the mayor.
Sure. And how many people ran for mayor? This was the amazing thing.
We had 3 people that ran for mayor.
Oh, was it just 3? I thought
just
there was
3 for mayor.
10, 12.
Okay.
But we had like 30 people run for office, right, for these 6 positions.
Wow.
We had like some districts where there were 5 or 6 people running for council.
That's
so there was a lot of energy. A lot of people wanted to be involved and help.
That's really exciting.
And, you know, it's interesting how this stuff works. So, I mean, again, people that have known me my whole life find it so hugely ironic that I'm a politician because I'm super cynical about that kind of thing. And like, you know, that's a whole other podcast. But, you know, we had spent so much time and energy on this thing. And I do startups for a living, and it was a startup city. And like bootstrapping is something I'm good at. So it just felt like a good fit,
exciting.
right? All of that. But also, you know, there are people that had lived in this community for 40 or 50 years that just felt like, look, the new people are taking over and we don't want that. And I totally get that. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So 2 of those ran against me.
Okay.
And we had the first vote, and I came within like 20 votes of winning outright. Right, I had the most, but not over 50%. Right.
Okay.
And then the 2 guys that had been running against me kind of threw in together, and the one supported the other.
Sure.
And in the runoff, he beat me.
Yep.
And fine, you know, because it was never an ambition of mine, right? I just wanted to make the thing happen. So I went in the day after the vote and said, Don, I want to help you any way I can. Let me know how I can help. And ended up getting very involved in the zoning rewrites and all of that. And, you know, ran the comp plan update as a citizen volunteer. And I mean, I kept engaged.
Right.
Now, you know, we were talking about the finances. Startup finances are tough.
Yeah.
You have to apply for the local option sales tax. You don't get it for the first few months. You have to apply for a lot of these things. There's a time cycle to them. And so money that the city had kind of budgeted having right at the beginning didn't come in for months, some of it. And we also got a lot of freebies. We had the sheriff's department, you know, giving us free service and all of that. But that was something too, that the local politics, you know, when the local county commissioners realized that we were getting free sheriff service. I mean, the sheriff's office looked at it like, this is public service. They're paying their taxes. We're going to protect them.
Exactly.
But then the county commission said, nope, that's going to stop.
Right.
And so we had to stand up a police department the next day. And they got into debt.
Sure.
And it's difficult too, because, you know, when you look at what a city has, you think, okay, we need all of these positions. And so they hired people for all of those positions.
Right.
Now, you know, as a startup guy, you say, how much money do we have?
Right.
And then who can we hire? And again, Chattahoochee Hills, awesome company, had great people, but they were very corporate, and there was kind of a corporate mindset that was driving some of the processes at the time. Long story short, by the end of the first cycle, the end of the first term, the city was right on the edge of bankruptcy.
Wow.
About 30 days from running out of cash, actually, when I took over. And it was interesting. I had a conversation with the guy who had beaten me for mayor. And we have a weak mayor system in Chattahoochee Hills, which means that the mayor doesn't vote. The mayor runs the meeting. He is the head elected official, makes sure that everybody's following the rules and all of that, but I don't vote.
Interesting.
And so this previous mayor had realized that he didn't have that much control, actually. And, he wasn't able to change some of the spending things that were going on and all of that. And he didn't want to be the mayor anymore. He said, I think you should be the mayor.
Right.
And he supported me running for mayor the next time. And he ran for council. We worked together. He just retired, but we worked together for 10 years. And then I came on as mayor. And again, I do this for a living. So we quickly cut back to the actual necessary services.
Right.
And, we just as an interesting data point, we had a police chief, a lieutenant, 2 sergeants, a detective, we had all these people and like 2 patrol officers,
Right.
And so I took the sergeant, made him chief. Everybody else got to go. And we built up a department built around, young, aggressive folks going out and doing their thing.
Right.
And it took a couple of years, but we were able to turn the financial situation around to the point that now we're making profits of a few $100,000 a year that we're rolling back into road paving. So all of the city functions are working. We have a great fire department, great police department, great planning, all of the things that you would expect you could be able to go into a city and get an answer for. You can get here. And we have a structural deficit that I talk about all the time. We have over 107 miles of roads in this city. Right. We have no commercial tax base other than what's in Serenbe. We have no industry. We have no, there's no factory pumping out huge profits somewhere. And we do not have enough money coming in to keep our roads up.
Interesting.
Right. Okay. In the long term, our roads are slowly deteriorating. Okay. And this has been a part of the narrative from the very beginning. Our zoning is predicated on the idea that by developing 25-30% of the land intensely in these walkable, high-value communities, you create 2 things. You create the money that does the preservation, that funds the preservation of the remaining land, and you create the tax base that provides the services and keeps that preserved land and the roads going through it and all of that in good shape. The difficulty's been that we became a city right in the downturn, right? And a lot of the people that were planning on doing developments down here didn't. And the development landscape has kind of changed a little bit since then. People aren't doing these huge projects as much anymore. So it's been difficult for us. And that is our biggest issue as a city right now, is trying to get more of the kind of development that will fund both the preservation, create the preservation, and fund the things like the infrastructure work that we are falling behind on.
And so a good example is Serenbe has about 80 acres that have been disturbed as tax revenue land. And those 80 acres represent what percent of the budget for 40,000 acres?
That's the thing. No, it's an interesting statistic I use all the time. Less than 1% of our land that's been disturbed, actually about 0.5% of our land that's been disturbed, creates almost 50% of our tax base here. It creates the hotel motel, the bulk of our hotel motel money. It creates half of our property tax revenues. It's a huge benefit to the city. Now, the city gets a lot of other tax money in other places, local option sales tax and things like that are done on a population basis countywide. If we were surviving on our own sales taxes, it'd be even harder. We get sales taxes from outside.
Right.
And so as we move from a 0.5% of the land to 30% of the land, it's going to be a very different picture.
Yeah. Right. Eventually, this will be one of the richest cities in the state of Georgia because 2 things. When you develop this way, the service costs are actually lower. You need fewer police stations. You need fewer fire stations. People are concentrated, and the places that you have to provide service are more concentrated.
Right.
And the road networks are concentrated. So there are fewer roads to maintain.
Right.
And the other coincidental benefit is that we're going to end up, we've already got in Cochrane Mill Park, the busiest park south of 20 in Atlanta, the best park. And that has all been done with volunteer money, volunteer fund, volunteer effort. And, you look at a Strava heat map of the parks in the county. It is the busiest one.
Oh, that's a cool way to think about it.
Like you don't even have to guess, right? You can just see. what we're going to end up with, hopefully, I mean, Steve and I have been working on some really, Steve knows about a lot of this stuff, and some of it is stuff that you can't really talk about until it happens. But, there's the possibility of thousands of acres of parks, public parks.
How many acres are there now?
Right now, we've got about 1,200 acres of public parks.
Which is pretty significant, I would think.
It's huge. But there will be far more. And, you're going to end up with 30,000 acres of preserved land in this city. Yeah. Which is just amazing.
This is an amazing recreation corridor for Metro Atlanta, as well as the preserved trees that our city is doing is helping the air quality of Atlanta due to the wind blowing northeast.
There's another piece of this too. There is an equity piece of this that people don't think about often. I went to high school in Roswell. I dated a girl up in Alpharetta back in the day when driving to Alpharetta from Roswell meant driving through farmland, right? And every single person who lived in a little farmhouse and went to one of those little country churches in that area has been displaced in the last 30 or 40 years. Yeah. Every single one. And that is the tradition of Atlanta sprawl development, right? The sprawling subdivisions come out. They eat up all the land. They push out everybody that lived there. And now you've got this gross, sprawling suburban dreck, right? Yeah. Here, I like to think about planning on a 100-year horizon. If you think about what Chattahoochee Hills looks like 100 years from now, the little family farms, the parcels of land that people in this community have been living on for 6, 7, 8 generations, right? We know some of these 8th generation people, they're friends.
We had the Peakson interviewed them.
Peaks, a good example. They're 8 generations from now, great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren can be living on that family farm. Yeah. They get to participate in the upside of the development through the transfer of development rights program. So this is one of the things that doesn't happen anywhere, right? Right. The farmer's kid always sells the land to some developer at a low value. They don't get any of the value out of the development, and then it happens. Here, they get to sell those development rights to a developer. They get a piece of the upside to pay for the upkeep of the property, and they get to keep the property. The farm, right? And that doesn't happen anywhere. Right.
Well, and I believe Jed, who's on the City Planning Commission, they're expecting their child, who will be, I believe, the 10th generation.
That's amazing.
On this land. The Haddaways, right?
Yeah, the Haddaways. Yep.
So that's the interesting kind of thing that's happening here.
Yeah.
So tell me, as you're looking forward, I know Steve has a lot of visions for Serenbe that I know you're very aware of, and we've talked a little bit about it. But talk about what the city plans are, besides obviously the preservation, more parks. What would be that sort of 3 ideal economic development projects that would come in and really start to move the needle to support those 107 miles of road?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, we were just involved in a charrette a few weeks ago on the Buchart property. Carl Buchart owns over 8,000 acres in our city, which is another amazing thing that we have these landowners that own huge parcels.
It has beautiful eventing space.
And who are aligned, too, with this vision.
Very much.
They agree with the idea of doing the preservation and so the idea that there may be some of these larger developments of the type that we were hoping for at the beginning, that, are the mixed use communities where it's live, work, play and dense and walkable and all of that, and create the tax revenue and do the preservation. There's hope now that some of those may actually be starting sometime soon. So that's one piece of it.
That's great.
The other piece of it is we're doing some things as a city to kind of seed some of that. There's an area at the north side of the city called Campbellton. It was the old county seat of Campbell County that still has a couple of the old roads and a few of the old buildings of a town that actually at one point had over 2,000 people living in it.
Wow.
And then because the railroad went to the other side of the county, everybody moved over there and the town kind of died.
Interesting.
And we're working with the city of South Fulton right now to do a planning exercise up there to create a village in our idiom that crosses over into the city of South Fulton, because and I'll come back to that. But, that's a place where the city is going to rezone an area and create the ability for the small parcel holders up there to participate in village development. Because the idea is, okay, if you can't find as many developers to do the big projects, maybe developers will come in and do small pieces of the big project that the city has zoned.
Right.
And the other piece of this is I've come to realize more and more that our outcome is very dependent on what happens around us. There's this trend right now for distribution warehouses everywhere. And I could do a whole nother podcast on that.
I know.
But the problem with them is that they're just so far away from being the best and highest use of that land, right? It's not that they're not economically beneficial. They're just much less beneficial than almost anything else you could do.
Yes. Well, and you're hearing my sadness at the look of them, although, I'm the one who's also ordering my Amazon Prime, so I can't totally complain, But
this is the thing, right? So, we have examples in the community where a city has built one of these right next to the boundary of another city, right next to a residential development, and it's really impacting the quality of life negatively for the residents there.
For the community, yeah.
And it's because they're not working together, right? Like if you were working together, you would never do it that way.
I know.
And it's hard to work together because, frankly, you're responsible to your own constituents first, right?
Right.
And because of kind of the tyranny of low expectations on the south side of Atlanta, people kind of accept what they can get rather than holding out for what they could get if they hold out, right?
Right.
And so part of what I've been trying to do with the other mayors down here is create this kind of higher order narrative, right? And we should be working together to attract the better businesses that are more in line with this higher value view.
Sure.
And so this project with the city of South Fulton is one where the mayor of South Fulton and I have gotten together and our staffs have gotten together and said, look, maybe we can make an example of working together to do exactly that.
That's great.
Create a high value development that is good for both of the cities. It's right on the border between two of us. It's at a place where there's a lot of traffic already, so the demand is kind of already there. And let's just show an example of doing it better, right? And this is how you get people to understand that you can do things better by showing them examples, right? And that's one of the things that we're doing. And then the other thing is, we're looking at ways that we can do these things in bites, right? So one of the things I've talked with Steve about a lot, and we're in the process of updating our zoning, places like Serenbe should be able to buy development rights and be more dense. If they want to build a new phase that's more dense, they should be able to, because that creates two things, tax base, and it creates preservation externally. Those development rights that they're buying will permanently protect something outside. And so we need to be more flexible, I think, about concentrating development where it's already happening, right? The idea of other projects around Serenbe makes sense because this is where development is happening and we want to concentrate. And, we joke about it sometimes. If somebody were to come and build the 100-story skyscraper and buy all the development rights right in the middle, we could protect all of the rest of the city, right? That's not realistic.
Right.
But trying to find those places where something is happening and doubling down on it, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And we've got a lot of that going on. And then we've also got things like the Riverlands project.
Right.
Where I'm a big believer in branding and the idea of the branding of a place, right? I mean, if you don't put your own brand out there, other people will give you the one you don't want.
Yes.
And so this place where it's not just about, high quality development, it's also proximity to nature. It's also about kind of rural lifestyle. It's about, Milton.
Yes.
Is a beautiful little town. Love the mayor, good friend. And they have 5-acre zoning because they want to be an equestrian community. And 5-acre zoning means that there's a house on every 5 acres.
Okay.
You have these big houses on every 5 acres, and it just looks like huge suburban sprawl, right? And the thing that they found that happens up there, this equestrian community, a bunch of people build their big $1 million houses next to the horse farm. And all of a sudden they're calling in and complaining about what horse poop smells like.
Oh, no.
Right? And the horse farmer is being shut down because it's a public nuisance, right? So, I mean, my view of this place is so different from that, right? I want to know that 7 or 8 generations from now, the kids will know what cow poop smells like because there will be cows out there somewhere, right? And so we're working a lot on those sorts of things where we're protecting and creating parks and protecting farmland, the Rodale Institute coming down.
Incredible partnership.
A whole nother podcast, right? About all of that and how you economically engage that protected land in a way that makes people want to keep protecting it, and how you do the farm to table stuff and all of that in place. And that's all a part of our brand narrative. So we're trying to sew that all together into something that is that, something for everybody, amazing. Like, who wouldn't want to live their place, right? And again, for me, we're halfway there in Chattahoochee Hills. We don't have a lot of money to go out and like put that out into the world,
Sure.
but like people that find us hear it, and the people that we talk to hear it, and they know it, and they're starting to internalize it, and they're like, oh, Chattahoochee Hills, that's that place where the horse eventing thing is, like you said.
Right.
Or Serenbe, oh yeah, I've been there. That place is amazing. That's in Chattahoochee Hills. Or Cochrane Mill Park. Oh my gosh, yeah, we go down there and ride our bikes or ride our horses. And,
Right.
So you're starting to develop that brand, and we've got this airport that we're 20 minutes from, and the potential of an economic driver that not only makes this vision happen in Chattahoochee Hills, but also creates that rising tide that lifts the quality of life for all of the other cities between us and there. Yeah. And it's cool to be able to be, because, I get to have a seat at the table as the mayor, even of the smallest little city here, fifth largest city in Georgia, but, smallest population in our side of Fulton County. Anyway. Right. You can start articulating that higher vision, and people pick it up. And I just love how much of that now has become incorporated into the kind of overall vision. And I mean, I'm on the board of the Aerotropolis now. We've tried so many ways to get the mayors of South Fulton together to work together toward higher order economic development. And it's hard to do because, how do you get the business community involved, and how do you get all the other players involved?
Right.
We've all now become board members of the Aerotropolis Alliance. And the Aerotropolis Alliance also includes people like Delta, and, Chick-fil-A is there. And so the bigger players.
Porsche and Hateville, that whole area is sort of part of that.
And they're articulating that vision on a grand scale, right? Like, yeah, nothing good can happen on the South Side. You're never going to have Class A office, except Porsche came in and said, we need to be close to the airport, and built this amazing facility there. Yep. And they've proven the point, right? And so this message of aiming higher is something that has really become a part of the narrative of things like the Aerotropolis Alliance. Right. And, when people say, oh, we need to do some really, these quick in and out warehouses right by the warehouse, everybody's like, yeah, we need to have some of those, but let's not put them everywhere. Let's be thoughtful about where they go, right? There are places that we need redevelopment. Let's maybe put those there. There are places where we can do high quality greenfield. Why don't we aim for some Class A office buildings, right? Why don't we aim for the midtown of the South Side?
Oh, I love that. Right? That's a great one.
And I've got a lot of those, by the way. But I mean, you think about other things that are going on down here. You think about things like Fort McPherson, right? Yep. You have these opportunities, these data points already where better things are happening on the South Side.
Well, and we were just talking before the podcast that the AJC put out a great article recently before the holidays all about the arts and how the arts is sort of migrating to the South Side. And I think that's a huge opportunity to really take ownership of that dialogue or narrative.
For sure. And I mean, you think about the way this stuff plays out. I've got a good friend from CNU who moved to East Point, Georgia from Chico, California.
Oh.
And he does infill development, right? He'd been doing it in California for years, decided he wanted to move to the Atlanta area, and, asked all of his friends in Atlanta, where should he live? And everybody's throwing out, Old Fourth Ward and all the cool places in town. Right. It's like, no, I want to go someplace where I can do something.
Right.
And he picked East Point.
Yep.
And he's doing a really cool redevelopment project in downtown East Point in this neighborhood where all these beautiful little bungalows are, right?
And our team here, and just so you can see, is nodding because some of them are moving to East Point there. Right. I mean, so it's this up and coming.
I'll introduce you to John Anderson, who's an amazing guy who is doing this amazing project there. But it's an example. It's a touch point, right? And Dina Holliday Ingram, who's the mayor there, who's also a great friend, we talk about this stuff a lot, in the context of not wanting to create displacement, right? You don't want to push the people out that are living in a place, but you also want to create better quality of life for them and everybody else. And how do you do that? Access to arts, access to nature, access to transit, all of those sorts of things, and weaving that into this conversation, right? And so we're doing that on so many levels. Another example I like to give is College Park. They have the Georgia International Convention Center. The hotels around that are the highest performing hotels for the Marriott system in the country, right? Right here on the south side of Atlanta. There was a piece of land across the road from that. For years, people were coming in wanting to do warehouses there. And the mayor at the time, he's been replaced, and that's a different subject. But I mean, he held out for quality. And they've now got a development there that they're calling Airport City that's going to be a mixed-use development, a huge new addition to the downtown of College Park, right there by the transit station, that will have huge positive impacts on the quality of life for everybody around that area, right? Where the warehouses do just the opposite.
Exactly.
And so, again, not saying, because I shop from Amazon too. No, we need them.
I know.
But we don't need them in places where something better could happen.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the kind of overarching narrative that, again, this beautiful vision that is Chattahoochee Hills is helping to demonstrate, right? Like, we can hold out for better. We're proving that you can hold out for better.
And the beauty is, because this area was saved from the sprawl development that for the last several decades, we've been able to see some of the ills that's happened with the north side, and we're able to be more thoughtful. And for instance, the city and the entire area, you're saving the right-of-way for some sort of transit, well, whatever form that is in the future, whenever it happens. And it's thoughtful thinking like that that's going to make a difference.
There's also a piece of this that is about changing the narrative around how we work on that kind of planning. Everybody recognizes that the north side had amazing economic growth, but because they didn't do things like save transit alignments, now to go back and retrofit that stuff is incredibly expensive, right?
Okay.
And we're making an argument on the south side that if you do that planning ahead of time and spend the money when the land is cheap and when you don't have to bulldoze the McDonald's to put it in and all of that, you get a much higher return on investment. And if you look at our national competitors, places like Charlotte or Salt Lake City or Denver or Dallas, they're all doing that. They're all doing infrastructure development on the come to attract the kind of development they want, right? And what's amazing to me, when I first started talking to Marta about this idea of transit on the south side, they said, well, we can't map things that we can't see a path to funding. I'm like, yeah, but if you map them, the development comes around them that creates the funding to make them happen. So map them.
Look at the Beltline.
And they've done it. So we've got now mapping down South Fulton Parkway for bus rapid transit with dedicated lanes and all of that. We've got the right of way, as Steve pointed out, for eventual transit. And what's interesting is in the way that
when you say eventual transit, you mean train?
Train, light rail.
Sorry, I just want to...
In the way that the politics are working, we may actually be able to get that mapped sooner rather than later. That's the pitch we're making. The pitch we're making is that by spending, $1 billion or $2 billion on infrastructure on the south side now, you can seed $150 to $200 billion in development.
Wow.
You don't have that kind of ROI anywhere else in the state.
It's incredible.
And when you think about, too, it was really interesting. We had a meeting at City Hall last year where Marta came down to get community input on that. And you should have seen Facebook. Tom Reed's bringing Marta to Chattahoochee Hills, that was them doing it. It wasn't me doing it, whatever.
It's the typical complaint in any city, BART, or, the BART system in San Francisco did not go over to Marin for many reasons, but they didn't want it. Same thing with going north towards Sandy Spring.
What was really interesting,
it's really unbelievable to me because it's only a benefit for everybody.
But what was really interesting in this meeting, right? The meeting was attended mostly by people that live in the countryside in Chattahoochee Hills who don't use transit, wouldn't want transit, are probably afraid of transit.
Right.
And yet, when the Marta folks started talking about the fact that you guys have this village thing planned right here, that's going to be this really intense thing. And how do you think all those people are going to get to work? They're going to drive through all of your roads, right?
Suddenly.
But if there was a train line or a bus line or something that took them straight up to the airport and to the city where the jobs were, that would keep them off of the local roads. And it was amazing how people's heads came around to this idea.
That's a wonderful way to, put it together.
It protects what's around.
Yep.
By getting them to where they want to go, one. Two, it creates the economic development that we need to protect your land and to pave your roads and all of that. And it limits the impact rather than increases it. And it was just really cool how people kind of came around to that, right?
Well, unfortunately, we have very few examples of balanced development.
That's right.
It's what we have seen for the last 4 decades. It's development at a detriment to the rest of the community. But balanced development is what you're talking about.
Right. That's right.
And this entire area is one of the few places that shows that.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I feel like we've covered quite a bit, but I feel like we're going to have you back to do a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say there's 3 or 4 that I wrote down just as we were talking.
Yeah, well, I think this is so exciting, and I really appreciate you coming in. I love that you're our neighbor. You live still here in Serenbe, and we hope you'll be our mayor for another I don't know, a couple years? What do we got going? What's our next cycle that we're going to get to vote for you on?
So we just had, we have elections every 2 years for half of the group. And so my current term ends 2 years from the first,
Okay,
right? So
perfect.
2 more years. And,
We'll cross our fingers.
And then I think of great places. Charleston comes to mind. And how long was the mayor in Charleston?
I love what we're
years?
doing here. I love this vision.
40 years, you said?
Right.
Okay, good.
And we're not even close to done. Right?
No, and it's like, you hate to.
I don't promise anything, but right now I feel like this will be going on for a while.
And Monica, it's amazing. I said this before, that you have this vision, but the reason it's all happening is the people that somehow arrive here, and it's just amazing to me. So the fact that Tom's wife Karen decided to come here, and Tom's leadership in both forming the city and holding things together, it's another example about it's the people that, for whatever reason, end up here, and then this becomes part of their vision. And as a group, all these people are bringing this forward to make this what's going to be for generations to come.
And there are so many amazing people, right? Yeah. We've got so many volunteers working for free. Nobody gets paid to be on our city council. Nobody gets paid to be on our commissions, and all of the volunteer efforts that have led to so much of this inside of Serenbe too, right? I mean, the number of community barn raising things, but outside, it's absolutely amazing.
So if people want to get involved in the city and help, or if people want to contact you to support one of your economic development ideas, how do they get a hold of you?
tom.chatthillsga.us is my email.
Great.
Come to city council meetings.
Come to city council meetings for sure. Be careful about putting your hand up. I am notorious for grabbing anybody who says they want to volunteer and immediately putting them to work. So, and I love that. It is the thing that makes this go around. It's the thing that makes this work, is the fact that so many people get involved, and we've got so many amazing people. And honestly too, for people who might be listening to this in Atlanta, right? Take a moment to think about the potential of a place like this, and maybe take off the kind of, I just know how people look at this, right? Like, oh, I've been on the South Side before, and they missed the airport exit. They got off at Old National, and got panhandled at a gas station or something, and that's what they think the South Side is. Come down here and take a look. Yeah. I've driven people around. People have come down and said, come down and show me around Chattahoochee Hills. Like, how much time you got? Well, I'll come for lunch. Maybe we drive around for an hour or so. 5 hours later, we're still driving around. They're like, we're still in Chattahoochee Hills? This is amazing. And what's cool is, you get people down here like Dick Anderson, who's the CEO of Fulton County, county manager, I guess. He has become an amazing ally, because he sees the potential, right? People like Doug Hooker, there are so many people in that kind of leadership in Atlanta that really get it. Yeah. The people that are harder to get down here are people in the development community, right? Because they're busy up where they are. Sure. And finding those people and getting them down here to get a peek at the vision. Yeah. You can't have returns like this anywhere else, right? Land's too expensive in other places. Yeah. The opportunity here is amazing. And the quality of life, right? And how often do you have, I'm sitting across the table from a developer who lives in the development he's developing.
I don't know if that happens anywhere else.
It doesn't happen, right? It's pretty amazing. And why is that? Partly it's because he's carrying out his vision, but partly it's because he also has an amazing quality of life living here, right? And so I'm daring developers who are interested in doing this kind of cool mixed use stuff to come down and take a look, because they're going to want to live here too.
That's great.
Right. Well, and what's more, how many developers then have all their kids return?
Yes.
And are lucky enough to have their grandchildren being raised there. So that's
because it's such an amazing quality of life.
Yeah. But 50 years ago, that wasn't unusual for someone developing a place.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much. Come see us. Come call Tom. Bring your development dollars. And we'll definitely have you back again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please rate and review the podcast, and make sure to email your questions for Steve Nygren to stories@serenbe.com. You may even get to hear them on the podcast. More details about episodes and guests are available on our website, serenbestories.com.